I'd like to talk tonight about different aspects, two different aspects of leadership in Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Simkin, I know, was one of the last Talmidim of Yeshiva Soloveitchik. Maybe the last year, could be with the last year.
The last full year of his
last full year. And I felt I would like to talk a little bit about some of the ideas of Rav Soloveitchik. One idea that Rav Soloveitchik expressed many times was that we have a mitzvah that appears a fair amount of times in Sefer Dvarim. It's called Valachta B'drachav, going in God's ways. And, one Gemara talks about Mahu Rachel, Mafatah, Mahu Chanon. Gives you the different midos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we have to imitate. We have to imitate those midos. There's another Gemara that talks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mevakachol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kover Mesim. So there we're talking already about actions that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. And we have a tendency to think that the Gemara is giving us the examples of how to imitate Hashem. And that's it, in a very narrow way. These are the different examples how to imitate Hashem. Rav Soloveitchik says it's not true. He says those are only Mishalim. But any time we find a midah shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah or in Tanakh, or we find an act of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah or Tanakh, that becomes a chiyuv for us. In other words, if we act like in that manner, which we find, that's a kiyum of the mitzvah of Valachta B'drachav. Essential mitzvah in Yadus. I mean, could you have a more essential mitzvah than imitating HaKadosh Baruch Hu? First of all, it's the biggest covenant in the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu held that we can imitate him. Right? So the Alter of Slobodka used to say, since he holds you can, therefore you must. So Rav Soloveitchik raised the famous question of why do we have Briyas Ha'olam? Why does the Torah talk about Ma'aseh Bereishis? The Ramban already says, how much could we know about Ma'aseh Bereishis? What happened? So many people have so many questions on what happened during that time when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Rav Soloveitchik came up with what he felt was somewhat of a unique approach. He said he thinks it's not something of philosophy, even though the Mishnah, the Sefta Chagiga, talks about Ma'aseh Bereishis, who you're allowed to learn it with, you're not supposed to learn it with. Rav Soloveitchik said that here we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a Yotzer. He's a creator. And it could be, he says, that that's the whole reason for Ma'aseh Bereishis. To teach us that we have to be creators. Mahu Afatah. Bereishis starts off with HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Shamayim v'Aretz. And then it says that it was Tov v'Vo v'Choshech al Pnei Sol. So Rav Soloveitchik says we have an obligation wherever we find Choshech and Tov v'Vo to be an or. To create or, to create light. Rav Soloveitchik gives an example, actually, of building a yeshiva in an area that's somewhat, he uses, I think, the word hostile to yeshiva, he says, or. Certainly in a place where there is no yeshiva, where it's basically a midbar. Could be that's why the Torah was given in a midbar, to tell us that we have to build up midbariyas through Torah. So he says that that's why the whole Ma'aseh Bereishis was written, in order for us to realize we have to do the same thing as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we find the place in the world that's Tov Vavo and Choshech, we have to bring light into that place. The truth is, the Alter of Slobodka says, by him, the Midah of Chesed in Slobodka had a central place in Slobodka. And he says that Avram Avinu became the Amud HaChesed. He was the first of the Avos who became the Amud HaChesed, the pillar of kindness, which we see constantly in the Torah and the stories we see of Avram Avinu, because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was. And he has to imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says, when it says, V'sanefesh sha'asu b'choron, that Avram Avinu took along Sarah and Lot, and the nefesh that he made in Choron, right? So right away Rashi says, the nefesh, how do you take along the nefesh that they made, right? So Rashi says that Avram was Begayer, the Anoshim, and Sarah was Begayer, the Noshim. And the Alter says that, where did Avram Avinu get that from? Normally we say he was the first Kiruv rabbi. Avram Avinu, he found what we call monotheism, and he wanted to spread it. Like I have many students in Chappelle's and Midrash Rachel, they get very turned on to their Judaism, and then they try to spread it to their parents, and they try to spread it to their cousins, and they try to spread it, to everywhere. They want everybody to know the good thing. Usually it doesn't work that well, by the way. I always tell my students, don't try to be makar of your parents. It's not going to work. The Alter of Slobodka says that the ikar of the Yitzira of Adam, right, was Vayipach Ba'achbo Nishmas Chaim. That's what made man. So Avram Avinu saw that the ikar bria of the human being was the Nishmas Chaim. And therefore, he held that just like Mahu Afata, right, it was not that he was interested so much in Kiruv, he was interested in imitating HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the ikar of the Yitzira of the person was creating the neshama, the nefesh. That's what he took along. He turned these people into nefashos. He turned them into spiritual beings. That's what the Alter says, why Avram Avinu became the Amud HaChesed. He became the Amud HaChesed not only because he did things that in the world of Achnosas Orachim, not just the material things, but he turned the people into neshamos. He brought out the Tzelul Kim Shabbat. And I followed Rabbaran and the Rabbanit Beverly. I followed them from a not from close up, because they weren't so close. I mean, Israel is quite far away. I've traveled to LA a few times. But I read about some of the things that Rabbaran and the Rabbanit went out to. And we had a few positions, but the position I think he's most known for is Northridge, California, the suburb of LA. And it very much reminded me what Rav Soloveitchik said. He went to a place that was tov, vavo, v'choshech al pnei sodom. I don't even know. Sometimes you say you can count the From Yidden on two hands. I'm not sure you could count it even on one hand, how many Orthodox people were there. Maybe there were on a half a hand you could count it. And he went there, him and his wife, family, and he built Yadus in a place that was choshech al pnei sodom. In a place that was a midbar. And he went in there and he said, Yehiyar, there should be light here. And he built a shul. And he built shiurim. And he built a mikveh. And he built an eruv. And of course, he found an opportunity. People needed kashrus, so he went into there. And he actually mentioned that, exactly how I got into kashrus was because I saw there was a need for kashrus. That's a leader. A leader is somebody that takes the choshech and he brings it to or. He builds a new community. That's the highest level of a person who imitates HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I want to say that him and his wife did it not with a lot of fanfare. He's a very low-key guy, you probably know. There's also another midah that we have, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has. We have Asos Mishpat, it says in Mincha, Ahavas Chesed, V'atznei Aleches Im Alokecha. That's also going, Atznei Aleches Im Alokecha is Mahu Afata. And I think the Simkin family was very much like that. No, no big fanfare. You have to change the world. And, the author of Slobodka used to say, I saw an article written, someone wrote an article, someone from Slobodka many, many years ago, probably in the 1930s he wrote this article. He said that the author said that people were created to do chesed. That's why Kadosh Baruch Hu created people, to do chesed. So he said, if that's what you created for, why does anyone have to know about it? The author said, why does anyone have to know about it? And the truth is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a world, and yet you can have an atheist. You don't have to know about it. He's behind the scenes. He's laid back. And I think Rabbi Aaron was very similar to that. He was building and building, but slowly, and as we say in Yiddish, stiller hate. Quietly, he was building. I figured that Rabbi Aaron refused the Rav, or the Asra, wanted to make him the honoree of the evening. And I figured that, he's not the type of guy who wants the limelight. We find that in 3 places, Rashi says the same thing. When Moshe Rabbeinu has the challenge of Korach, so he says, one of the things he says, Lo chamor echad nasasi. I didn't take even one donkey. It's very interesting how he defends himself in front of Korach. I didn't take, that's one of his defenses. I didn't take. So Rashi right away brings a chazal that says, even when I went to Mitzrayim to take the Jews out of Egypt, I went on my own donkey. Normally, if you're working for a cause, you have a right to charge the cause. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, Moshe, go take the Jews out of Egypt. So Moshe could have said to them, you got to pay for my fare to get there. Right? You got to supply a donkey, you got to supply food, you got to supply all the things you need. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's another place by Shmuel HaNavi. When Shmuel HaNavi is challenged by the Jews with Malchus, the Jews want a king, so he gets them a king, but then he lets them know that what a leader should look like. And he says, testify, at shor milakachti, did I take someone's shor, did I take someone's chamor? And Rashi right away comments, says, all the places I went to be makar of levavos, all the places I went to teach Torah and be a shofet, Shal Yisrael, I didn't take anyone, I didn't live by anyone, I took my own donkey. I didn't charge anybody for anything. And again, by Shimshon, when Shimshon asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Zachreni no v'chaskeni, Rashi right away says, Zachreni, why? Because I never asked any of the Jewish people to ever carry my staff from one place to another. My grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov, was asked to write a hesped on a Jew in Toronto. His name was Rabbi Chimayer Korolnik. Family in Toronto. Rabbi Chimayer was a Chassidish Yid. I mean, he didn't look exactly like a Chassidish Yid today, but he's from Hasidim. Toronto was mostly a Hasidic community. Whenever I go there, I have a hard time finding a siddur that's Ashkenaz. And when he passed away, a number of years after, they made a book, the family made a book about Rabbi Chimayer, and he was the big Askin in Toronto. And they asked Rabbi Yaakov to write a hesped in the book. And Rabbi Yaakov agreed. And Rabbi Yaakov said, at the beginning I decided it's going to be a very easy thing, because he was such a great Askin. He built the whole From Toronto community. In fact, he was responsible for Rabbi Yaakov becoming the Rav in Toronto, because he had to sign that Rabbi Yaakov and his family would not become a burden on Canada. He had to sign. So Rabbi Yaakov felt that it would be very easy. But he says, as I began to write, I saw the face of Rabbi Chimayer, and he looked like, who are you trying to kid? Why are you giving me this comfort here? This is what Rabbi Yaakov writes. So I decided to write more, what is a real leader? And he quotes this Chazal that Rashi quotes in Sefer Bamidbar by Korach. And he says that the pshat in the Chazal is that these leaders, the true leaders of Klal Yisrael, didn't feel that Klal Yisrael owes them anything. I'm this great leader, you owe me something. You owe, at least pay for the donkey, right? They didn't feel that. Why? Because the pain of Klal Yisrael was their pain. They were so empathetic to the Jewish people that you couldn't separate them. You couldn't separate the leader from the Jewish people. That's what Rabbi Yaakov says. That's a true leader in Klal Yisrael, where he's not looking to get anything in return. He sees that Klal Yisrael has a need, and it becomes his need. So of course he's not going to ask for a donkey, because it's his need. He's doing it for himself. He's not doing it for the Klal. That's how much he identifies with the matzav that the Jewish people are in. Whether it's Moshe Rabbeinu, whether it's Shmuel HaNavi, right? Shmuel HaNavi was spreading Yadus throughout the Kufas HaShoftim. There were such problems with the spread of Yadus; it wasn't being spread. He came along and he changed the face of the people in Eretz Yisrael. After Shmuel HaNavi, in the whole Sefer Shoftim, you keep hearing Avodah Zarah, more Avodah Zarah, more Avodah Zarah. You can't believe what's going on over there. And all of a sudden, after Shmuel, there's no more Avodah Zarah. Not all the way till the Malachim, into Sefer Malachim, that you see Avodah Zarah. There's no Avodah Zarah. Could you imagine that change that he made? And he didn't charge a penny for it. Took his own donkey, he ate his own meals, right? Didn't charge. He was describing for the Jewish people, this is what a leader is. This is what a Jewish leader is. And that's the way I always felt about Reb Aaron and the Rabbanit, Beverly. I always felt that he doesn't feel like he's owed anything. He's doing it because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. He wants us to create, and he wants us to build Yadus. So this is, of course, I have to do it. I don't need any, you don't have to give me any comfort for that. And everything was, like I said, Hatznei Aleches. It was like, no big deal. He was accomplishing and doing what he needed to do. And recently, I met the Rav at a Chasana, and I said to the Rav, I heard that, I'm going to be the guest speaker for Rabbi Simkin. And he said to me the same thing. He says, I want you to know, he does a lot for the shul, but still a hate. Nobody has to know about it. Like the Alter of Slobodka said, you have to do chesed, but why does it have to know about it? I would like to end with a story that I had with Rabbi Yaakov. I learned in Chaim Berlin. The Rav was asking me, what were you doing in Chaim Berlin? He didn't understand, like, what you don't fit in Chaim Berlin. That's what he said. And the Rav's not wrong. The Rav's never wrong, by the way. But, so the truth is, at night, I used to sneak out of Chaim Berlin and go to hear Rav Pam, Zichrono Livracha, in Torvadas. And Rav Pam, I don't know how many people knew Rav Pam personally or knew of Rav Pam, but he was a very big tzaddik. I'll tell you, Rav Moshe Feinstein had a son-in-law. His name was Rav Moshe Shiskal, Zichrono Livracha. He would probably have been one of the Gedolei Yisrael, but he died at age 52. Okay? Rabbi Yaakov was very nispal from him. He loved the way he taught. He says, an emisa, you can get a derech from him. He was an emisa teacher. And I used to speak to Rav Shiskal. He was a very serious person. Extremely serious. So I always felt it's like a challenge to get him to smile. You know? So I remember my father and I used to visit him. His wife worked at one of the camps in the Catskills Mountains, so my father always made sure. There was also someone else there, a fellow by the name of Big Rosh Hashiva in Torvadas, Rabbi Shadubir Rivkin, Chabadnik. He was a big lamdin, and we used to go visit. So I asked her. I once went to visit with my father, Rav Shiskal, and I said to Rav Shiskal, "What do you think of Rav Pam?" I asked, "What do you think of Rav Pam?" Rav Shiskal, by the way, learned Torvadas as well. Rav Pam was already teaching a Beis Medrash here in Torvadas at that time. And by the way, I have to tell you, his wife was a public school teacher across the street from my house. So during the break, she would go in to the house, to my house. She knew my mother very well, and she would call up her husband on a Friday. She would say, is the kugel ready yet? I don't know if I'm going to get someone in trouble here. Okay? But she worked on Friday, and Rav Pam, you know, in the morning he worked, but he was home. And he taught third grade when he started out. And his wife, I heard her say it, and he would have remained in third grade if not for your grandfather. Rav Pam he's teaching third grade. Okay, he's a good Rebbe, he's teaching third grade. Eventually he became like the Rosh Yeshiva of Torvadas. When does a Rosh Yeshiva of a yeshiva start out teaching third grade? It's very rare. You know, you either become the Rosh Yeshiva or you go into business. You know, you go to the top. You know. Anyway, so I asked Rav Shiskal, what does he think of Rav Pam? He says, you know, I'm also Noivet Hashem. But he's a Malach Hashem Tzvakos. That's what Rav Shiskal said about Rav Pam. He's a Malach Hashem Tzvakos. So I went to Rabbi Yaakov, and I saw what kind of Oivet Hashem Rav Pam was. You know, at the end of the Shir, he was always invited to weddings to do Siddur Kedushin. But he didn't want anyone to drive him. So he wouldn't let anyone know that he's going to a wedding. But there were a number of students that had cars. So they would go to the bus stop where they knew he was waiting to go to Borough Park to the hall, to the wedding, to perform the Siddur Kedushin. Right? So they would go pick him up and say, we're actually going this way, and take him to the wedding. But he wouldn't let him. He was one of the few Rosh Yeshivas that didn't have a kapota. Even after he became Rosh Yeshiva, he didn't put on a kapota. He felt he was not on the level, so to speak. So I told Rabbi Yaakov, what I thought about Rav Pam. And Rabbi Yaakov smiled. He was sitting by the table on a Friday night. And he said to me, I want you to know something you don't know. I said, what? He says, Rav Pam was my Shabbos bacher. He ate by me on Shabbos. I was a married younger man in Slobodka, Nikolo, and Rav Pam was in the Yeshiva Ketana, and he used to come to eat by me on Shabbos. And he came many, many weeks to eat by me on Shabbos. And I'd like to believe that I had a little part in making Rav Pam who he was. That's what he said to me. So I want to end by saying, I would like to believe that Rav Aaron, that Chappell College had a modest influence on Rav Aaron in becoming who he became, which is a leader in communities, a leader in kashrus. I'd like to believe that there was the humble beginnings, as we say, was where we had an influence on Rav Aaron. Thank you very much.